Hey everyone, like Allison said, my name is Phil Compton. I'm the CFO of Locomation, a local autonomous trucking company that you may have heard of, and we could talk more about that. And I think this is about my 10th or 11th time doing this, so I know my way here. Let's put it that way. I'm from south of the border, West Virginia University. In fact, I was down there for a couple of days last week, and we have a brand new School of Business, a new building down there ourselves, similar to your Tepper building here. So I'm CFO of Locomation. We're an autonomous trucking company. You might have heard, there's been some challenging times in our industry recently, and some of you might have heard of Argo actually closing shop here in Pittsburgh last week. So they are in our industry, and certainly the market's been challenging here the past year or so. I'm a CPA, but I'm also an entrepreneur. I've invested in early stage companies, including 2 of my own, and I advise several early stage company CEOs and founders. I started out with PwC, the big 4 accounting firm, and did that for about 3 years and really enjoyed it. But I had an itch to get into industry or business. So I went with a local company that at that time was on NASDAQ called Black Box, B-Box on NASDAQ. They no longer are on NASDAQ. And I've been with a couple of startups that actually have CMU roots, which I'll go over that. And Malcovery, here's that cybersecurity company that I started in 2012. Even as a CPA, I started a cybersecurity company, and I helped found that in 2012, and we sold it in 2016. So we'll talk some about that today as well. I have experience in several complicated financial transactions over the years. Black Box was a whole litany of those, a leveraged buyout, which today is called private equity. An IPO attempt, which we did not end up going public while I was there, but we did attempt, and then unfortunately took them through a bankruptcy. So I kind of did the whole 360 degrees of transactions you can do in a business. I have had 3 exits. One is a company called WiseWire. So WiseWire was an internet search engine born out of the graduate school of the College of B&E here at CMU. In the late 90s. And there was another company, and that was formed by a grad student here, Ken Lang, L-A-N-G. He had a professor, Mike Malden, I think he was called Fuzzy Malden, and that doctor was the professor to Ken Lang. So Ken Lang formed a business called WiseWire. The doctor, Dr. Malden, ended up spinning out Lycos out of CMU and formed his own company. So professor and student both had companies. Long story short, Lycos went public, big splash in the mid-90s. They were actually they were the main search engine pre-Google that you don't hear much about anymore. So Lycos went public, and long story short, Lycos ended up acquiring WiseWire. So that would be like Dave Malwini acquiring your startup. So the professor bought the student's startup, acquired it. So that was really interesting, and I worked on that transaction. We actually sold WiseWire that had about $1 million in revenues in the year that we sold it for 40 times the revenue value. So today you might hear of companies selling for 5, 7, 8 times revenue. We sold it for 40 times revenue. So that was truly the tech bubble days, which were actually, until about 12 months ago, I think we were in another bubble here, and we're finding out it's painful being post-bubble, right? Because you see what's happening in the market. Malcovery Security, again, was that cybersecurity company I formed. We sold that to a company called FishMe, whose CEO is actually also a CMU grad. So there's 2 exits in a row that I dealt with CMU grads as CEOs of those companies. I've been involved in a lot of rounds of financing, more than I would care to tell you. VC fundings in excess of $150 million now. So that's quite a few rounds racked up. And a lot of other kind of transactions. I'm involved in sales negotiations, investor relations, HR, facilities, legal, helping run board meetings and things of that nature. So very active in the local tech community. So let's move on. Today, we're talking about financial modeling, and the three main parts of my workshop are building your model, and we'll go over the assumptions that you should use and memorialize that you're using in your model, so the reader of your model will know what you assumed. In other words, you don't just have a bunch of spreadsheets, but there's actually a narrative up front, a set of notes that lets the reader know what your main assumptions were. We'll then look at testing your model, because you don't want that model, that financial model, that set of projections to go out to investors and they're like, oh, in the first 5 minutes, I found 2 errors. That's not good. So we want to make sure we stress test and perform scenario analysis on our model before we send it out to outside parties. And then a third part of my presentation, which I didn't start out including this, but I tried to demystify the cap table. That's something that a lot of founders get kind of anxious when you're thinking and talking about that. So we'll go over that. So those are the three main parts of my workshop. When you're building a financial model, in other words, a set of financial projections, it's good to forecast those projections on a monthly basis for the first 2 years. So a lot of times when you're going out to an investor, they might say, they'll say, well, can you give me your 5-year projections? Well, gosh, we just started. I don't know about 5 years, but I can at least try for the next year to 2 years to try to give you a granular monthly projection of what I think, how I think that the business is going to progress, when our product will become readily available or service, when we will engage with customers, when we'll launch the product, when we start generating revenues, and when we'll start collecting cash. So that's kind of the whole cycle of cash. You spend cash for your employees and in developing the product that you're going to develop. And the ultimate is you collect cash after you've sold that or performed that service to the customer. That's called the cash cycle. So first 2 years is detail. Obviously, it gets more difficult as you go out in time, because 5 years is an awfully long way out. It's easy to ask for 5-year projections. It's not so easy to give the 5th-year projection. And what are you planning towards? Your initial funding round? I would assume most people on this session today are looking at, maybe you're not even thinking about starting a business. You're just exploring. Maybe you just came here to get, see what this was about. Maybe you're actually starting to think about forming your company, and one of those things is fundraising. In fact, that's a pretty darn big thing. You can't get very far without cash to fuel your operations. And maybe some of you are like, well, gosh, I've got to build a model, so I might as well come and see what this guy has to say about it. So whatever camp you're in, you're probably in that initial or early phase. Or you might be, we raised the first round and now I really need to have an updated, more professional set of projections because I'm going to go after round 2 of my funding. So whatever your situation is. In terms of what you're planning towards, are you building a company to sell? So in other words, are you thinking about starting a company, running as fast and hard as you can, and for 2 years, and then you're going to try to flip it? Well, that might be applicable to buying a fixer-upper house, but that's not near as easy to do in starting a business with the immediate goal of selling it. I think that would probably, and anything's possible, by the way. Anything I say today could have a counterpoint, or someone else might have another viewpoint. I'm sharing what my viewpoints are in my experience. I would say that shorter term focus is hard to navigate, because you're probably, if it's going to be a short term focus, you're going to have to rely on some fortunate timing and maybe a stroke of luck. Like right now, the market in general, the markets in general, including the financing markets, the funding markets, the VC markets, are muted. They're down, and I can tell you because I have firsthand experience as of yesterday in it. So I'm living it right now. So hard time to raise money right now. Or are you building a company that think maybe someday, my gosh, we'll go public someday. In my 5th year, we're planning on going public. Well, there have been times in industry cycles where that is a reasonable and achievable path to undertake. If by chance you were thinking about IPO in the next year, I would say that, the markets are relatively frozen right now. So there aren't a whole lot of IPOs going on. There will always be exceptions. There will be companies that are shooting stars and gazelles no matter what the market conditions are. But for the most part, I don't have to tell you what the economy looks like. This is not the time to be thinking about going public. But that might be in your future plans. That might be 5 to 7 years out. I keep pushing the wrong button here. So that might be 5 to 7 years out. Be careful about that. Hey, we're going to go public in 5-year kind of plan. There's a lot of effort, structure, initial upfront expense, and ongoing being public expense that you have to incur. And I've got fresh experience from that, because last year it was in the news. We actually, tried to look at a SPAC. So one of these reverse mergers with a company that's already public that has cash, and companies tried to backdoor their way and merge with that public company, and now they are the public company. Aurora, which is the other big autonomous trucking company here in Pittsburgh, conducted a SPAC. Several players in our space conducted a SPAC. SPACs were really in vogue, say 12 to 36 months ago. Then about 12 months ago, that window really kind of came, slamming shut. But, hey, who knows, in a year that might be a market that's open again. So going public, what I'm just trying to say is a hard route to take, unless you're talking about, 4 to 6 to 7 years out. So there's pros and benefits of going public. Or my favorite is building your company for the long term and seeing what happens. So if you build a company where your product or service, I want to make sure I keep saying service is every bit as viable of a company and a business plan as a product. If you build your company or product or service that's an improvement on a current solution or service, probably at least 100% improvement. If it's something that's fairly commoditized, if it's brand new, then there is nothing before it to compare. But if you build a product or service that customers want, that they pay for, not just use, but pay for, if they benefit from it, you don't want to sell, this. I'll point out this. I'll use this pointer as an example several times during my presentation. It's a Logitech. I love it. I love the company Logitech, their products. But if I build this and the customer buys it and it sits on a shelf, that's not kind of the goal. If I build this, customer buys this and they benefit from it and they buy more of it and they experience, positive use case with it internally, and they talk about it with other potential customers, and they post social media messages about it, about how great this pointer is, and they reorder and buy more of it, and it's profitable and you're making margin on it and they pay for it. I think I've repeated myself. You've got yourself a winning strategy. And if you keep doing that and building the best company you can for the long term, options will avail themselves to you. The market and competitors will find you if they keep seeing good things about you. Doesn't have to be front of the Wall Street Journal, but if you keep kind of hitting those solid singles, opportunities will open up to you. So you don't have to have it all figured out day one. And by the way, no one does, no matter what they might tell you. Be realistic in your numbers and the time it takes to achieve them. I've seen several business plans that say, our first year, we're going to be developing product, no revenues, of course, no customers. Second year, we're going to do $1 million in revenues. Well, that's actually not a bad first sales year. That's your first year out in the market. Third year, $10 million. Oh, wow. 10 times. Okay. So you went from 1 to 10 in 12 months. That would be exceptional. And then the fourth year, of course, we're going to do 100 million. So we go 10, 10, 10. Okay. 0 to 100 in, I think I said it wrong, 3 years. That you would be special. So I would suggest to you that you need to be a bit more real, what's viewed as realistic in your ramp. Again, there's always exceptions to this, right? You could, in fact, go from 1 to 10 to $100 million in revenues in 3 years. It's just you would be in really rarefied air. So being realistic, a bit more believable, and of course, having a bottoms-up model that proves that you could reasonably achieve those numbers is going to be necessary for anyone to believe them. You'll be viewed as more credible and less risky. I think I just said this, if you demonstrate good judgment in your projections. And I just happened to build a model or a template that you can use. Now it's becoming a little bit dated. I'm probably going to update it for next semester. I didn't get a chance this time, but it's been used quite a bit, and it's up on your website available for use. Talking about assumptions, and we're gonna look at the model. So it's not just going to be a PowerPoint slide. We're going to look in the model and work with it. You need to document the assumptions you make in building your model. Don't just rely on the fact that after you've put in 40, 80, 120, 150, 200 hours of building this model and hand it off to your co-founder and go back and forth, that you're going to remember every keystroke. You're not going to remember everything. You're not going to remember that formula in row 75 on the 12th tab. So what you need to do is document your assumptions. The first page of every model I build is always like the notes or the assumptions tab. Just, every time you make an assumption that's material in nature, go there and just jot down what you did, and then you can pretty up that narrative for external consumption. It tells the audience a more complete story and that you understand your own projections. No one wants to review a model and, there's a lot of math in the cell. I always refer to that. What you want to do is leverage, V lookups and sum ifs and what ifs, so that you can have kind of an input page that is then used for scenario analysis out in the model. What type of company are you striving to create? That'll affect your assumptions. Are you looking to build type of company? Yeah, so a product or a service. A product, usually, this pointer, once again, here we go, is longer to produce and get to market than something you might buy off the shelf and resell. If I buy this pointer off of from a wholesaler and resell it, I didn't really have to do anything except receive it and send it and advertise it. But if I'm going to build it from the ground up, that's going to be a lot longer. That's going to be a lot harder. That's going to be a lot more capital intensive. That's going to require engineering expertise, which I don't have. I can buy and resell, but I can't make this with its functionality inside. So the type of company is going to affect your assumptions quite a bit. And even more so if you choose to manufacture your own product. So if you buy and resell, relatively straightforward. If you assemble components that already exist in the market, a step harder, but not as complicated as building it from your bill of materials upward, where you might have, I don't know, to go into this pointer, who knows, there might be 15 rows of components to go into developing that finished product. So manufacturing is going to be, buying and reselling is going to be a certain level of difficulty, manufacturing quite a bit more. A consulting service, all you really need is your laptop and your fingers. So a consulting business, a service business, can actually be started up relatively capital efficient. Yes.
I recommend for a startup to have like a different version, an internal version of the model versus the external version that's like a little bit less detailed? Or like,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, in fact, we just did that. We have a virtual data room. Sometimes you'll hear of like a box or Dropbox or whatever, sites out there where you can house information. Even a Google Drive, you can share the link for that, or share permission, share user review, and house data in there. But it's a good idea to have an internal version that you update and kind of go back and forth with the team, and really uses your living and breathing operating model, as opposed to the more fixed version that you send out and share with outside parties, we would presume investors, where they don't need to see every single detail. They don't need to see what your fifth employee's salary is. What they need to see is what your staffing levels are over time, how you're going to ramp that, what the average salary is, what the benefits are, taxes, and then that row in your P&L, personnel expenses, what that will be. But they don't need to be, see your fifth employee's monthly wages. But yeah, good to have an internal and external version. I think that's about as far as you go. Internal, external version, detailed version, summary version. If you go having 5 versions of your model, that's going to be painful. And I've done that before. Yeah, we've talked about product or service. Are you going to build it or buy it? So if you're going to buy and resell right here, your margins will most likely be slimmer because you're buying a finished product and turning around and selling a finished product. Now, if you're buying a finished product and enhancing it in some way, I can't think of a good example with this pointer, but if you enhance it in some way and add on a capability or technology or an aftermarket modification to it that's valuable, then you can probably achieve better margins. But for the most part, when you buy and resell something, you're probably going to be stuck with margins in the 25 to 33% range. So a quarter to a third of gross margin. And that's before operating expenses. So anything less than 50% gross margin, you're going to have pretty thin bottom lines, because you've got to pay people, space, insurance, taxes, benefits, and everything out of that gross margin. So it better be north of 50 in some way. A third to a quarter is not going to get it. Now, if you manufacture, there will be a big cash usage up front. You've got to, if you're going to and if you manufacture it yourself, it's going to be kind of the worst cash situation of them all, in that you've actually got to build, secure, maybe rent, and then build out a manufacturing facility. It doesn't have to be huge, but a manufacturing facility that can produce that product. You could also, the cash outlay with pure manufacturing will be very high, but then your incremental cost per unit will go way down as you go into the hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands. So by the, I'd have to know a lot of variables, but maybe by the 10,000th unit, you've got maximum profit and minimal cost of goods sold per unit. If you choose to use a contract manufacturer, there are manufacturers that are just set up to receive capacity and work from different customers. You could buy time or engage with a contract manufacturer to build your product for you. A lot less capital intensive for you up front, but they're going to charge for all the capital intensive efforts and costs that they went through. So either way, you're probably going to pay about the same amount, but contract manufacturing can get you up and running quicker, because in the right scenario, they're set and ready to go and are ready to absorb capacity, and you are the one they're going to put in that available capacity slot. A service company, like I've talked about, I mean, a string of coffee/internet cafes can be every bit as viable of a business, maybe not quite the high shooting, volumes and valuation, but it can be every bit as viable of a company as building this product. Or if you want to consult, you have certain expertise, you've got robotics, engineering expertise that you just don't really want to join a company. You'd rather be a virtual consultant that you can live anywhere in the world. That seems to be more in vogue these days. You can just basically kind of rent your services out by the hour and be a consultant. And I keep lifting up this laptop. You're mobile. You don't even have to stay in a certain place. So that's every bit as viable of a business path as well. We've talked about build it or buy it, so we'll stop beating that up. Let's move on. Revenues via a direct sales team or through partners. So who would venture a comment on, you're just starting out, we're going to sell this wonderful pointer that I really seem to keep wanting to talk about. So we're going to sell this, and we're going to sell this product or service. But for this example, let's say we actually developed something pretty unique here. We didn't buy and resell it. It's a pretty unique device we have here. So the market isn't used to it. It's got a certain amount of novelty to it, and it probably needs a little bit of demonstration through videos, with people as to how they best use it. So do you think it would be best to have your team go out and sell that, or go through partners that already have a name in the market? What do you guys think? Who has a comment on that? So stumped looks. Okay. So what I would suggest is, unless it's pretty straightforward, the first time the technology is ever being sold, it would be a good idea to go direct sales. Why is that? Because what you're going to do is you're going to learn why customers say yes to your product or service. Everyone likes yes, that's a good thing. You're going to learn why they say no. And that's every bit or more valuable, because you're going to find out the contentions of what they had with this. Oh, this is great. And it's 80% of the way there. But if you'd had these two other features to it, we really would have been into it. We would have bought it, and that's the silver bullet. So when you have those two other features, come back to us and we'll be ready. A partner going out and selling that, and they've got other solutions they're selling, if they have to overly explain this, and they have people saying, that's interesting, but what they're going to do is say, oh, we're going to put that on the table and we're not going to spend time on that, because I'm going to spend time on stuff I can make money with. And your partner, sorry to say, doesn't really care that much about you until they make money off you. Then they love you. But if they're not making money off you, you won't be getting the Christmas card every year. So you will learn a lot more by direct sales. You will then be able to speak with investors a lot more eloquently and knowledgeably of why something did or didn't work, or you'll be able to hone your go-to-market fit if you've in fact had experience in the success and failures of why that product or service did sell, did resonate, or did not sell and didn't hit the mark. Once you've got some sales momentum and history underneath of you, you can document kind of the FAQs of what to say when customers start saying the word no, or if they start bringing up questions. And once you've got that experience, those FAQs, those responses, then you can leverage partners, and that will be valuable. But I'd say partners might be in your second sales act. You'd be direct first. You have a question?
I was wondering, if you go through partners, would that bring you more customer to the bigger customer?
Yeah. So what he's saying is, if I'm selling this pointer and I go through, I'll use the dreaded, I'm not going to use Amazon. If I go through, I don't know, IBM, I'm just picking a company. Everyone knows IBM. Everyone would probably assume that IBM's not going to be offering a solution that isn't fully viable and attractive. The problem is IBM, first of all, probably wants to sell what IBM produces. IBM wants to sell what contributes to their margins and bottom line most efficiently. And if the sales reps are having to kind of, spin their wheels and get up on a learning curve, again, they're probably going to say, well, gosh, Don't bring me another one like that, boss, because that one's not selling. So when you've got that experience underway and you can share that intel, that tribal knowledge with the partner, then an IBM might be great to turn on. Then a Cisco might be great to turn on. Again, Amazon is not a consultant. They're strictly a means through which we sell something, in my view. So I think direct first, partners afterwards. What type of and how many companies do you need to build your company? These are in assumptions. If you're going to manufacture something, you're probably going to need, software engineers, industrial engineers, electrical engineers, roboticists, sales, marketing, G&A, accounting, QA, quality assurance. So the type of company you're building will kind of dictate the type of employees you need. And that'll be built into your assumptions. But the bottom line is everything affects your cash needs. Not too many companies or partners are going to do anything unless they get some kind of compensation for it. So sometimes I'll say that, people and employees people and partners can be coin operated. You need to insert a coin in their back so they'll operate. We're going to look in the model. This is an excerpt of my first tab in the model called the notes page, notes tab. And we'll go into the model instead of going back and forth. So we'll do it more efficiently. Again, I've got a lot on assumptions here. What tools do people need to do their job? I kind of have fun with this one. So anymore, a desktop computer is probably not very normal, right? Everyone pretty much has a laptop. I mean, first of all, you want your employees to be able to kind of work anywhere they can. If you've got a building, you want them to be able to bring your laptop into meetings and team sessions and whatnot. Now with COVID, that kind of accelerated the desire and the pace of which people tend to work remotely. I mean, we don't go in the office every day. I work mostly remotely, and quite a bit of our team members do. The ones that work on the trucks are in there because I don't think you can work on trucks through the internet, right? I don't think your fingers go through there too well. So certain of our mechanically oriented employees have to be on site because we're working on big trucks and they got to be there. But for the most part, I guess my point is people want to have flexibility, and you want them to have flexibility in their employee setup, kind of their desk or their workplace setup. So I often joke that, anymore, everyone wants, the biggest hard drive, the most RAM, the fastest microprocessor, the biggest screen. In fact, you want 2 screens. In fact, what you want is a laptop that has a docking station, a cable, and then 2 big honking, monitors. In fact, you want that set up and also 1 mirrored at home. So you actually need 2 of everything you're asking for. And, you like to be able to stand like this. So you might want a desk where you can actually sit or stand. So you want a you want a stand-up desk. And in the old days, you actually had to crank the desks to get them up and down. In fact, I think Veridesk still has that version. It's a tabletop stand-up desk. But anymore, people just want to be able to push buttons nice and easy. And actually, I want to be able to stand up, but when I sit down, I want to sit in this nice Aeron chair that it's only $1,200 a chair. So it's not like it's that big of a deal, boss or company, $1,200. And quite frankly, I've seen cool stuff. I think I might want a treadmill desk where I can actually walk, kind of like on my Nordic track or my Peloton, and walk while I work. How's that sound? So people won't be shy to ask for anything. It's funny when you start a company, and I've started quite a few. When you're an employee, you think about what the company can provide for me, what the company is going to do for me. How can the company help me? How can the company help my career progression? What am I going to get out of this position? And some of you may have worked. Some of you may actually have come back to school. I don't know everyone's situation. it's funny when you form a company and you're the person that kind of started the company, it might be you and another partner too. Then you're like, gosh, everyone wants stuff. Why can't they just come with their own, bring your own computer, BYOC, bring your own computer, bring your own phone. Everyone's got a phone. You don't need a company phone. I mean, what did you do before you met us? Did you just not exist? Didn't have anything? Were you completely, equipmentless? So when we started our cybersecurity company, we had everyone BYO everything. We didn't supply anything. In fact, we did have an office for the first year, yet we closed 10 Fortune 500 customers in 12 months. I did that from my dining room table because as the CFO, I was also our legal counsel. I kind of faked it, but I was our legal counsel and I negotiated our contracts with eBay, Facebook, IBM, Visa, Dollar General, and these are big companies. And it was me at my dining room table. They didn't know I wasn't in a nice big Google type office. I was sitting there in my uncomfortable dining room chair, working till midnight every single night and kicking butt. So we closed 10 Fortune 500s in the first year. So we didn't need a lot, but as we started hiring people, we went from 5 co-founders to about 35 employees, which that's not a big company, but it's 7 times. And with every couple of successive employees, it was more like, well, what's our travel policy? Well, don't spend money that you don't need to spend and try to get the best price and spend company money like it's your own. Well, I need better directions than that. I don't know. I tell you what, we won't have any. And do we have a company credit card? No, we don't. We don't have a company credit card. You use your own and then I'll reimburse you. So when people got it in their mind that, they had to spend their own money, then they were going to get reimbursed. And they didn't just have a corporate credit card they could whip out and, buy stuff. Then it's more like, well, gosh, this entrepreneurial stuff's hard. You actually have to pay attention and be concerned about money. Yeah, you do. That's called a startup. Yeah. So a lot of new employees don't understand that. And you as the again, I'm just assuming some of you are going to be founders or have been a founder or are contemplating being a founder or are a founder or trying to be a founder. And you're going to find that you're going to have to say the word no to a lot of your employees. And what you want in your early hires is in entrepreneurial-like mindset people to join you. Now, not everyone's going to think like a founder because everyone may not have 25% of the company. So, there are some differences there, but just beware that as you add more people, it's mostly going to be a lot of statements from them with this at the end, and they're asking for stuff called question marks. So where are you going to put people? Remote is more viable than at any day, I think, in corporate America history. So I think you could just have everyone work in place where they are. There's an awful lot of benefit of having people in a central location. At Locomation, I was employee number 19 about 2.5 years ago. And we went up to 140, and that changed our dynamic a lot. I mean, we had a lot more people in the office. First of all, we had to find new office space, bigger office space, and we had to outfit it properly. And then we had to add a lot of bells and whistles that people ask for because we're competing with companies that have more resources and more of a name brand recognition than what we have. I mean, Aurora, for example, is multiple times as big as us. So we got to compete with a bigger competitor right here in Pittsburgh. And, but for the most part, early on, you don't have to be in a set space. You can kind of just work remote. And if you need to meet up, you can come to, any one of, there's probably 10 spots in Pittsburgh you can get into today free of charge, and you and a couple other people can work together. I mean, the older fashioned view is those conference, they have a closed room in a Panera. Most of them have one. It's a meeting room. You can actually get it for free, zero, And as long as you buy some food, they don't really have a time limit on. So that's one thing. Coffee shops, hallways, get associated with a center like the Sports Center for Entrepreneurship. Pitt has the same thing. Duquesne has a small business development center. There's plenty of places where you can get together if you need to. And if you need some space, I would always highly, highly suggest, in fact, almost dictate to you that you don't lock yourself up in any kind of big commitment. So let's just say you're going to lease some new space. There's a new building going up in the Strip District. You really want to be in the Strip District because a lot of your employees or prospective employees live in the Strip District. Plus, it's a cool place to be. There's a lot of robotics companies there and technology companies there. So you're going to get a space this big. I don't know, is this 40 by 40? That's 800 square feet. Let's just call it 1,000 square feet. And the landlord wants you to sign a lease for it. And you're like, oh, well, cool. I guess I have to sign a lease to get space. Yeah. So he's like, he or she is like, yeah, what we do is we have, 5-year leases, and let's just use 1,000 for easy small space. So 5-year lease, not a big deal. Yeah, you sign the dotted line here, and we're all happy. Well, when you're looking at the contract, the lease, it's like all these rules and everything, and at the end, it's like signator hereby guarantees the lease. So do you know what that means? You sign that lease because you're all excited to have space in this nice building in the Strip District. And what you've done is you've actually just personally guaranteed that lease for every month of the 5 years. And everything might be going great for the first couple of years, and then stuff happens. There's another word for stuff, but stuff happens, and you argo it. I really should not have said what I just said. You end up going out of business just for, for unfortunate reasons. That landlord's going to come and say, well, that's really unfortunate, but that lease agreement you signed here, is that not your signature down there? So you have to actually still keep making lease payments, because if you don't, I'm going to sue you. I like you, but I'm going to sue you. So do not sign any lease agreement or any agreement in which you can possibly avoid guaranteeing anything. A personal guarantee should be a no-go, unless you are just 1,000% confident of your fortunes and your projections and your future, and there's no way what I'm doing could possibly fail. Well, no one plans on a failure until it happens. They're not planned. So it's possible enough, it's percentage-wise probable enough that you need to not sign a guarantee of any form whatsoever, if at all possible. Please remember that. We've talked a lot about some. I mean, data and telecom, you will need. Everything is in the cloud so much anymore. You can subscribe if you wanted to. You could subscribe to Microsoft Office 365, and you pay a per seat user fee per month. They host everything. Email can be in the cloud. I mean, you'll probably want, for your website, you could even host it, and you don't have to host it yourself. But you'd probably want to have some kind of data infrastructure. So you're probably going to need a couple of servers and a router and an internet connection, and maybe even just a small data closet, maybe half of a closet, and maybe a rack. You'll need a little something, but as far as telecom goes, BYOT, bring your own telephone. Yeah. So, and if you need a company-wide line, there's 1-800-Grasshopper. There's all kinds of services where you can get a virtual assistant that sounds just like someone answering the phone, and then press one for sales, 2 for HR, 3 for accounts payable, and it sounds like it's a company. All it is a virtual answering service. Let's keep going. This is getting cut off, but anyway. So all these assumptions are big ticket costs that affect your initial and ongoing cash costs, your cash outlays. And what you're going to learn to say is, well, that sounds really interesting. That treadmill death sounds really interesting, but the answer is no. You're going to say no. You're going to say no a lot. And I'll take that even further. A lot of people talk about, cash being King Kong. When to me, cash isn't just, I said that wrong. A lot of people say cash is king. You've heard that statement. Cash isn't just king. To me, cash is King Kong. As I hit the desk when I make that point. Out of cash, out of business. Out of cash, can't retain employees. Out of cash, put the scare in employees. Out of cash, lose employees. I mean, out of cash is very bad. That's a pretty basic statement that didn't take a lot of intelligence, right? So we're going to look at the model here pretty soon. Keep it understandable and easy to update because you will most certainly be changing it many, many, many times. Based on your assumptions, when you build a model, you want to know what happens if you make changes that affect your cash spend up or down. So in other words, if you add revenues, that's going to be a good thing. Now, the qualification to that is if you add revenues in which you lose money on every unit you sell, that's not good. So what we're going to assume is while you might have negative margins, you have a cost of goods sold that's higher than your revenues to start out because it's a new technology and you can't quite charge what you will in a year or two. And your first several hundred units are just a high per unit cost. You might have negative margins for a little while, but over time, you need to have positive margins and you need to have what? North of 50% margins, north of 50% margins on your product. Revenues minus cost of goods sold is gross margin, gross profit. That needs to be 50% or higher. What happens if you add a body? Well, I can tell you it's going to cost money and it's going to cost not just their salary, it's going to cost employer taxes, benefits, assuming you give some, a place to put them, possibly a treadmill desk, and so forth. You have to purchase more computers, assuming you finally get to where you can afford to give people laptops and stuff. So everything costs money. You're going to expand inventory to have some of these pointers on the shelf that you can ship them, same day shipment when someone orders them online. Costs money to have inventory on the shelves. Going to open up a new office or location. I've seen many startups like, well, in the first quarter of our third year, we're going to open up a San Francisco office because that's a cool place to be. And next is Austin. That's 6 months later. So I got the country kind of surrounded. Pittsburgh, San Jose, Pittsburgh, the Valley, and Austin. Life's great. Well, you picked two of the most expensive areas in the country to expand. Now, New York would be another one for sure, but it's not cheap to open up an office in the Valley, and it's not cheap to open an office in Austin because everyone else seems to have the same idea. And when there's a lot of demand, but relatively fixed supply or not keeping up with demand, the price goes up. That's good old economics 101. So this appeared somehow. Are we going to take chat or save them until the end? Okay, so let me, I'm going to hide that. Okay. So in other words, you need to build your model so that any changes, any change you're going to make is going to either affect kind of the cash coming in or the cash going out. I think that was my point there. Again, we're going to look at the model. Let's wait for a second here. I'm getting a little bit repetitive here, so let's keep going here. What are the three financial statements? A little pop quiz. What are the three financial statements of that a company needs to be able to generate for external consumption? Income statement, also called the P&L, the profit and loss. Balance sheet. Income statement is the result of your operations. In fact, you'll even see the line in the income statement called the income or loss from operations. So it's a depiction of the positive or negative profit outcome of your operations, thus called profit and loss. The balance sheet you can think of as what you own minus what you owe equals what you keep. Very simple. What you own are assets. What you owe is liabilities. Assets minus liabilities equals net worth. It's the net of assets minus liabilities. It's called net worth. And then the cash flow statement is actually very important. It shows, it displays what cash you're generating, that's positive cash flow, or using or consuming from operations. Negative being bad, of course. So we're not really going to go over accounting 101 here, but here, in fact, is an income statement. I keep pushing that wrong button. Revenues minus cost of goods sold was gross profit. You can see I have here at 80%, better than 50, right? Minus your operating expenses equals bottom line. In this case, in this particular year, it's projected to be a loss. Balance sheet, what you own assets minus what you owe liabilities equals net worth, what you keep. Shareholder could be also called shareholders' equity. And let's switch to the next tab. What I did is I simplified this. None of my accounting teachers ever showed me this. I just figured this might make sense. So the financial statements actually, they actually tie together, and I did that in a color coding scheme. What you earn out of the business, net profit or loss, actually feeds into what you keep or retain in the business. You've earned it in a period, so it's either a plus or minus addition to what you've retained in the business. It's also the start for the cash flow. The cash flow converts the income statement, which is usually on an accrual basis. So it may not be all cash. You might actually have incurred, let's just say, legal fees. I would have to bring up legal fees. If you incur legal fees, but you weren't yet billed, you have to accrue for those legal fees. In other words, you have to account for services that were already performed, even if you weren't billed for them. So those will be accrued. But whether you pay them or not is depicted in your ending cash balance. So a cash flow statement simply converts your accrual basis P&L to your cash position or balance at the end of the month. That cash is also then part of what you own, right? And a balance sheet has to balance assets, $1,050,000, liabilities, $1,050,000. If a balance sheet didn't balance, it wouldn't be called a balance sheet. All right, so I think what we're going to do is go ahead and go to the model. Does anyone have any questions so far before we look at the model? Okay, so we've got half hour left. Let me. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
When you do the projection, would you recommend doing like a base variable like scenarios for the investor, or like how do you build in the fact there's some uncertainty?
How do you build in? What's that last part?
Uncertainty. So like do you have like a best case,
worst
case?
Yeah, actually, one of the tabs on one of the examples I'm going to use here addresses that. So what he's asking is, you know, should you just build a model where you have one case? You know, this is our picture, and we didn't really look at other alternatives. It's just we've got one, and that's the one we're going with. So you need to be able to allow for sensitivity testing, also perhaps what's called as what if scenarios. So good question, and I'm going to talk about that some. Oh, let's see here. I'm going to try to get out of this. I think there we go. So here's the model. And again, I'm assuming you guys can see this online. I'm sure you can. So here is the model that I built, and you'll see the first tab is called Notes. So this memorializes assumptions and comments of what's in the model in the ensuing tabs to come. And so it's what, about 60 rows of notes and commentary here. At the very top, I'm asking you to read this. This model is a template that I created and contains hypothetical information. Don't use my model's information and then go send it to investors, because I basically did company ABC. You want to make it your company. So you don't want to use all of my assumptions. Now, some of my, you can probably use, 3/4 of my descriptions here, but don't just go and change a few things and then pass my model out for your own. It's going to be kind of obvious it wasn't yours. But anyway, here's the template. Here's the notes. Down here, what's this other thing say? Usually I have variable cells are in green background or blue text. I don't know if I was 100% consistent, but if you see green background, that's going to be a variable cell that if you enter another value in that cell, it's going to ripple through the model. Another thing I did not do on purpose is no funding is yet inserted into the model. Well, why would I do that? It's so you can see the raw or pure cash need that you will have, the amount of funding you'll need. If I showed you a model that had funding in it, it would kind of mask what your funding need is. I think investors want to see, give me your projections, assume you have no funding, and let's just see what your low cash balance is, what the eventual cash trough is. So that's why I build models without funding inserted. Once we've identified this funding and everything, we've got that pretty much in place, we'll definitely insert it. And for scenario testing, you can definitely insert it. Pardon? This is going to be, I don't know what website it is.
With Commerce Sports Center Connect's webpage, and there's an archive section.
Okay. So I think you'll be able to look up this workshop's title, financial modeling, and then you'll see files under there. Okay. So under Sports Center Connects financial modeling, Phil Compton, and then you should see my 3 files there, and the model is one of them. Let's go ahead and go to revenues, because I want to answer your question about what if scenarios. So these green cells are what? Input cells, right? But I have a toggle here. You use that cell right there. What is it? F5. So you can change cell F5, and that's actually going to change the amount of revenues that is currently in this revenue assumption. So let me talk more to that. So we've got customer 1 here. You guys, you're going to start off with the customer at some point. You have a product, which I've just made this a software company. So software product generation 1. There's going to be some implementation, and I'm sorry, software. Let me start over. Software that you will sell to a customer, implementation in which you will integrate your software into existing systems in the company. So you'll be able to charge for that. And then some consulting fees to kind of, again, help them get up and running on your product. So in this case, I have 3 different products, or they could be called services, that each customer can purchase from you. And we'll just assume every customer purchases all 3 products from you. There's a close date. In this case, you can see this model is a couple years old, but you can change the dates and it'll be up to date. So March 1st of 2020, we did contract for a $40,000 software sale to customer 1. Yes, we're off and running. We actually have a sale. Woohoo! So we actually have revenues, but you don't have revenues yet. What you did is you booked that amount based on a contract that you and the customer signed. You both signed a sales contract. They agreed to purchase $40,000 worth of software. The close date of the booking, which is not revenue, of a booking is March 1st of 2020. So right here, that just simply looks at the formulas and says, well, gosh, whatever date that was closed times the amount, that's the amount of the booking we're going to have here in March of 20. Implementation fee, We're going to assume that's $10,000 in the same date. Some consulting. Consulting would probably be spread out over a couple of months, but we'll just assume it's all in the first month just for simplicity reasons. And everything assumes that we're multiplying by this cell, what F5, the toggle, that all the sales are as listed. In other words, at 100%. But this toggle cell, I call it the CEO toggle, used to run what if revenue achievement levels. And this will actually modify our revenues and also our COGS throughout the model. So let's just say right now we've got revenues of, we've got total bookings in this first year one quadrant here of $280,000. So you see that? The total of all the bookings I have in the first year is $280,000. If I go change this toggle cell to, let's just say 50%, that number over there had better be what, 140,000, right? Yeah, so 140,000. So what it did is this, oops, sorry guys. This toggle cell modifies the results throughout the model to allow for the scenario testing you were asking about. So what happens if we only achieve, 70% of revenues? We'll go enter the cell right there and you'll find out. Again, that'll update revenues and it'll update cost of goods sold. So you'll get all the way down to gross profit just with that one cell by doing that scenario testing. Now, I didn't tie headcount and salaries and other expenses into that. That might be wise to do so, but I didn't want to sit here and assume for you guys that we need 4.33 people for every $1 million in booking. I mean, I'm not going to know that. So what I did is I just kind of stopped at gross profit. But still, that's going to get you an awful big answer, that one cell. So that's going to be helpful. So I'm going to go change that back to where it was at 100%. Similarly, this hidden doesn't want to say hidden too well. So in this revenues tab, and I want you to pay attention to this, there's a booking section. In other words, I booked business, I haven't recognized the revenue. Revenue being recognized is different than a booking. A booking is I've got a contract signed, I've executed a contract, and I've got backlog. I've got backlog waiting to fulfill, but I have zero revenue yet. I don't have revenue until I deliver the product or perform the service, right? So let's go down on this same tab. We've got bookings here. Let's go down on the tab if this will agree to move. It's not agreeing. There we go. About 50, 90 rows down, 100 rows down, I actually have a revenue forecast. So what I've done is I've converted those bookings up in the top section of this spreadsheet into revenues here. Kind of cool. It's already done. How did I do that? What I did is I looked at, customer one, software generation one of the software. This mirrors the start date up above. Remember, it was March 1st of 2020. This mirrors the contract amount. Remember, up top it was 40,000. But what I've done here is I've given the term over which revenue is going to be recognized for those three products. The period or term over which revenues are recognized. For software, we're going to assume that this is the wonderful SaaS model, the software subscription. It's a fee a customer pays you every month. Investors love SaaS revenues, by the way, guys. So the term of that revenue, of that $40,000, is going to be spread over the 12 months of a 12-month year. Or in other words, if I go look at this cell, it's going to take the amount of bookings up above and divide it by this cell right here. You see 12. So 1/12 of 1/12 of 40 is in fact $3,333 a month. For the implementation fee, I'm going to assume that that's just one-stop revenues. In other words, we helped integrate this. We helped install this software into the network of IBM. I keep using IBM, and we did it in the same month, and we're going to recognize that month. We're going to recognize that revenue in the month of performance right here. But another note I had in here, sorry, revenues start to be recognized 1 quarter, or in other words, 90 days after bookings. Because what I'm figuring is you're going to sign up a customer, and then it's going to take about 90 days to get it ready to go on site, or, you know, through your VPN or whatever, and get it uploaded. You don't have to assume a delay in booking to revenue, but I think that's probably not a bad thing to assume. Is you sign the contract and you don't start at 8 o'clock the next morning. There's probably some waiting period. And I just picked a month, or I'm sorry, I just picked a quarter out of what I think is reasonable. So that booking up above was March. 3 months out from that, or 90 days or 1 quarter, is April, May, June. So I better see revenue starting in June. Oh, good, I do. Right there. Right there. The software being recognized 1/12 per month, the implementation being recognized in that same month, and the consulting probably really be a couple months recognized in that first month. And again, I have the revenue term set over here. You can change that. In fact, I think if I change that to 2, well, you'd have to redo the formula so it spread it out over 2 months. I didn't do that. I didn't do every single possibility in this file. So, and down at the bottom of this tab, you've got bookings up above, also known as backlog. You've got revenue down below. And at the very bottom here, I've got a summary of all your revenue by product. That's a nice summary over there. I've created your accounts receivable based on the above. That's kind of neat. Remember that June $40,000 implementation fee? So that's $40,000 right there. And then I've also got deferred revenue, which is going to be helpful for you to have. So this is a pretty full-featured tab there. I'm going to go to one more slot, one more tab out of the interest of time. It's going to be the employee input tab. People and money. That's a nice subject, huh? So let's just say you're the CEO. You've got a CEO, yourself, and a CTO co-founder, 2 people. And you're not in green because you're already hired and working. So all your future employees will be variables, and they're in the green cells like I've talked about before. But anyway, you're the founder, the big cheese, the big honcho, the lonely CEO who's going to build this company. I have departments laid out in this model, several departments. These are all pretty normal kind of departments I think you'll be able to use. Anyway, the CEO is kind of a general and administrative, a G&A, a non-subject matter kind of role. You handle everything, so you're therefore not a part of any real department. You're in general administrative. And you started on January 1st, 2020, and you made your first sale in January of 20. You're pretty good. Remember that? So anyway. And you're starting out at a salary of $80,000. By the way, that might end up being 0 because if you don't have any funding, you could say you're going to earn $1 billion, but it's called a fantasy. So you have to have money to pay yourself along with everyone else. I'm just going to assume, assumptions are dangerous, right? That you were able to start out your startup, or this year of this model, with an $80,000 salary. You know, it may be you've been in business 2 years and you don't really have a model yet. So this is actually your 2020. This year was your 3rd year. This doesn't have to be day 1 of the business necessarily. But in this year, you're going to earn $80,000. So that every month you're going to earn 1/12 of that $80,000, and so forth for this person. And in March, you're going to hire a employee number 3, and they'll show up in March over here. Right there in March, and so forth. So that is another fun tab because it's all about projecting your team. So let's go back to the final thing I'm going to say here. Sorry. You'll see I have statements summary and statements monthly. Statements monthly. So remember the 3 financial statements? Oh, and I've named your company the Next Unicorn LLC. Is that a good title? Yeah. That's good. You're the next unicorn. So you've got an income statement section by month. See all these months? And I think I have it built out for 2 years. 21, have it 2 years, but you can just simply cut and paste and copy more of that and make it up to 5 years. And I've got revenues. Remember the software generation you sold before? I've got room for software generation 2, generation 3, implementation, consulting. So I've got several rows for you here. And remember that $40,000 in software that started billing at $3,300 a month before? It's pulling over into this income statement. So I've got the income statement here. Right below it, in the same tab. Man, this I'm not having luck getting this to move. There we go. Right below the income statement is the balance sheet. And right below the balance sheet is the cash flow. So you've got all three financial statements all in each column of this spreadsheet. These are your monthly financials that we talked about, having those for 2 years, right? I then have a statement summary tab that's exactly homogeneous to that other spreadsheet. In other words, row 80 is the same row as the other spreadsheet, the statements monthly, but I've summarized them into quarters here. So this might be more of the summary that you want to share. This might be the second version of your model that you just, all you're going to do is give the investors this one tab, copy and paste this tab, and that's the one excerpt of the model you'll show. If they're truly interested and want to dig in more, you'll give them the whole version. So you kind of get two versions. The one tab, micro version, summary version. The second version, give them the whole thing. They don't need to see everything at first, though. So I've got some statistics out here, and I think this probably built it out a little bit more than I remembered, but I think that will be helpful for you. I'm going to go back to the presentation, and we're going to start looking at some terms you need to be able to talk about with investors. So burn rate. Burn rate is the amount of money you spend every month. Now it can be gross burn rate. I'm going to tell investors or the audience, the reviewer, how much money I'm spending every month, or it might be net burn rate. When I start earning revenues and collect cash, so I've got cash minus my expenses, that's the net burn. But in the beginning, you're almost surely just going to have a gross burn. In fact, investors probably won't even say what's your gross or net burn, they'll just say what's your burn. So your burn will be the cash amount of your expenses every month. That being the trending amount, because 1 month does not make a trend. I would say you need to have 3 months identified, a quarter at a time, to say that I break even in this quarter. I mean, I didn't break even for 2 days and then never break even again. I didn't break even for a week. No one's going to care if I broke even for a week. They care about my ongoing sustainable trend. So I'll say a quarter at a time. So your burn rate is the amount of cash you consume in a given month over a quarter. And that equals your cost of goods sold, because I had to pay for it, your operating expenses, people, insurance, benefits and stuff, plus your CapEx. You might have had to buy $2,000 computers for your team. You might have had to buy a treadmill desk. We keep coming back to that. You might have had to buy a server rack and a couple of big servers. So those are capital expenditures. And if in the beginning, you won't really probably be borrowing money and repaying it. But if you did have debt obligations, kind of like a mortgage, right? Pay payment every month, that would be includable in your cash burn rate. Your runway is how much cash you currently have on hand divided by your monthly burn. So I'm going to be real simple. If I've got $1.2 million in the bank and my burn is $100,000 a month, I have 12 months of runway. Cash on hand divided by burn per month. 1.2 million divided by 100,000 per month. Now, if I'm able to have that same 1.2 million in the bank and my burn in my particular situation is $50,000, I've got 24 months of burn in the bank, of runway in the bank. Conversely, if I've got $200,000 of expenses every month, or I'm double what I thought I'd be spending, my gosh, I missed it by 100%, the investors are going to kill me. I only have 6 months left. So guess what? I need to actually, by the time I discover that, I need to actually start raising tomorrow. Because I'm going to be out of cash in 6 months, and it takes about probably a good 6 months to raise a round of funding. So I literally have to, the minute I discover that, I have to start raising the next day. So you need to know the terms, burn rate and runway. Does that seem logical and clear to everyone? Okay. All right. These are a little bit more nuanced. EBITDA break even. So EBITDA is earnings before depreciation, interest, taxes, and amortization. The fact is, in the beginning, you're not going to be dealing with much of that stuff. So, but you need to know the vernacular though. Yes.
Runway would probably include the assumed investment, right? Because
Yeah. So it would not be fair, per my prior example, to not count the funding you're going to have, because that's kind of the whole point of raising money, to find out how long it's going to last. So yes, the runway, you include every dollar of cash that you have in that calculation. EBITDA, it's the point at which profitability, or what's called income from operations, is reached on a sustainable basis. And when I say more than a couple of months, remember I said a quarter. So you might say, well, gosh, our first year, we're going to be developing product, no revenues, therefore no cash in. 6 months into our second year, we're going to start selling product or service, but that's only for half of the year. And we really won't break even EBITDA wise in the second year, but by about midway through the third year, in other words, at the end of 1 year of our first selling period, midpoint year 2 to midpoint year 3, I actually can break even, because after 12 months of revenue and cash collection experience, I'm actually break even. So that's cool. So it's probably going to take 2 or 3 years, excuse me, to get the EBITDA break even. Cash flow break even matters more though, because that's the point at which EBITDA break even is kind of when you break even book wise per your accounting records. Cash flow break even is when your net cash exceeds your net outlay. So it's when cash flow is sustainably positive. And remember, cash is king, right? As I hit the desk again. So let's keep going. You will burn cash before you sell, unless you start out day one with this wonderful pointer I've talked about so much. You're going to invest, spend, hire, and finally reach revenues, and then finally start getting cash in from customers. Or once again, if we use the keyboard in our fingers and we're a consulting firm, we might actually be able to be cash flow break even in maybe 6 months. Might be a lot quicker. If 2 or 3 of us are working in a small consulting boutique little LLC that we formed, and we're able to kind of start charging customers right out of the gates, and it's just the 3 of us and our laptops, which we brought to the dance, you might be able to be cash flow break even within the first year. In fact, I'd suggest you probably will be. Of course, you've got to go out and market your services and everything. It's you'll spend more than you realize. All right, so let's keep going. So I think I've gone over the model about as much as I would. I want to leave, I always cut short, 10 minutes on the cap table here. So why don't I go ahead in the interest of time? So I'm actually going to switch over to the cap table. This will be 10 more minutes, guys. And I think if I hit exit about 20 times, it's gonna exit. There we go. No, so exit there finally. Wow. It takes a lot of exits. Let's go over to the cap table. This thing, I would say that hide feature doesn't work. All right, so this is the start of the funding picture. And that's kind of a odd sentence, but let me just get started here. Okay, so and what I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to get rid There. Okay, so let's just say there's two founders and you started out with two founders, the CEO and the CTO, and each of you have 1 million shares of the company to start out with. So just to back up, there's no magic as to how many shares you need to start a company with. It's real common to just go with 10 million shares to start the capital structure of a company. Doesn't have to be that way. I mean, actually, you could issue 1 share and have everyone own a percentage of 1 share. It would be weird. You know, hey, I'm gonna join this company as the CTO, and they're giving me 0.12875 shares. It's great. Well, what? That's really odd. I've never heard of 0.12785 shares. It's more like, hey, I started and I got 500,000 shares. Pretty cool. Yeah, it sounds better, right? It's really the same. I mean, 1% of any number is still 1%. The percent in a pie can only ever be 100%. It can be bigger and smaller, but it can't ever be more or less than 100%. So let's just assume for ease of purposes, we're going to start out with 10 million shares of 10 million authorized shares to start your company. Whew. But it also doesn't matter until shares are issued and outstanding. So in this case, the two founders kind of looked at each other and awarded themselves $1 million each. And now you've got two people owning 1 million shares for a total of 2 million divided by 2 million is 100%. So you own 100% of the company. And you're starting. Yeah, and you're starting off. So let's go ahead and we're going to hire our first first couple of members of our management team. And we've got couple of killer additions to the team, and they're each going to cost us 250,000 shares in addition to their their salary. And we're going to go ahead and issue them, 500,000 shares. 500 divided by 2.5 million is 1/5 or 20%. It's not a big deal. We still own 80% of the company. So we knew we had to issue shares to attract other people. And by the way, this is the assumption you're going to issue stock options to your employees, which most tech companies do. You don't have to, but it's just the assumption. So, okay, we kind of awarded 20%. They're going to vest over time. They don't own 20% all the way up front, but that's going to happen. And then, we're kind of operating on just our savings. We got some friends and family to invest some money, and we had to sell 100,000 shares to them. So now your 100% is down to 80% is down to 77%. And we're going to hire about 10, 12 people here. So we're going to create a stock option pool. That stock option pool is going to be 400,000 shares in total. This keyboard and I do not get along. Okay, so 400,000 shares of an option pool, 100,000 of which are granted and out in people's hands, and 300,000 shares of which are unissued. So 3 million shares issued and outstanding. Oh, gosh, we own 67% now. That's lower. Yeah, that's the way math works. So when you add more numbers, your percentage goes down. But that's okay, because we've got a kick butt team and everything's going great, and everyone's having fun, and there's no end to anything. Oh, I guess we have to raise money now. So we're going to go out for a first ever round of funding, and this file will be shared with you, but I've really tried to kind of dummy this down. There's only 2 variables in a cap table calculation like this, and that is the amount of money you're going to raise, called new money, and the value of your company prior to that new round. Otherwise, everything is a fixed calculation. So we need to raise, my model has told me we need to raise 500,000. That model came in handy. So 500,000 is kind of modest, but we're going to go with it for now. $500,000 of new money that we negotiated. We're negotiating to bring it in. And our pre-money valuation, what are we worth before we even open the doors? Well, it's in the eye of the beholder. So it used to be that, and there is a rigid kind of thinking, a traditional kind of way of thinking that you'll compare your value of your new company to the value of other companies when they started out that are comparable to yours. I don't know how many times I've been told by founders, and I've probably even said myself, when no one's quite like us, and you're going to hear that, no, we're not comparable. I know you can't compare them to us. No, we're different in this way. Everyone's special, right? But you're going to say we're different. And our valuation can't be put in a box. It's not the average of these other 5 companies before they ever got their first round. It's next unicorn's valuation. So that valuation we're going to stand by is $2 million before any money is added to the company, or what's called the pre-money valuation. And we've negotiated that, we've declared that, and we're going to run with that. So in this case, if you've got 3 million shares of funding outstanding before you go into your new round, the price per share is that value that you've just come up with and negotiated divided by the number of shares is the value per share. Well, that's pretty easy to understand. And the amount of money you're bringing in divided by that share value will spit out the number of shares you're going to have to issue to bring that party in. Well, let's look and see here. Here's another slice. And what did we say over here? We just brought in $750,000 of shares to get that money. That bought 20% of the company. My 2 million shares seems to be shrinking all the time. It's gone from 100% to 80% to 76.9% to 66.7% to 53%. Wow. Yeah, but you've got money to operate. Yeah, but that's not the last money we're ever going to raise. All right, well, let's, and we could go on and on about this, but let's just say we really probably need to raise $1 million. I mean, let's give ourselves a whole year's runway, because Phil taught us about runway. We need a year's runway. And that pre-money valuation, we're actually more valuable than we first thought. Again, this is negotiable. You have to kind of fight for your right here. And that $1 million was even more expensive under this scenario, about 25% of the company. Remember, the $1 million, the value per share right here is $1 per share. So $1 million costs us 1 million shares. And wow, we're down to 50.00000% ownership. But we can't look at it that way. Management's on our side, friends and family on our side. Our block of ownership is 65%. So if I start thinking of it more globally in that way, I'm not as uncomfortable that the founders are down to 50%. It is going to be very hard if you're going to raise money, very hard. And I'll say for the third time, very hard for you to retain more than 50% of your company if you take more than one round of funding. A round of financing usually costs you about 20% of the company each time. It's not magic, it's not science, but that's about the average. So by the time you've gone through 2 rounds, 20% of 100%, then 20% of that 80%, you're probably going to be south of 50%. Now, if you're on the board, that gives you more representation. If you feel like brothers in arms with your management and friends and family, if you got friends and family on the cap table, consider it more of a block of ownership. But you need money, investors have money, outside parties have money. You can't run a company on nothing. Maybe you are a trust fund baby where you don't have to bring in investment. That'd be really cool. That'd be nice. But the majority of people will have to bring in money, and you're just going to have to get comfortable with the math, how it works. Yes.
What determines the founder's valuation?
The founder's valuation, actually, you can kind of get by in the beginning without any valuation. So when you guys form the company, if you're not undertaking a transaction of any type, you don't really need to ascribe a value to it. You'll most likely be given restricted stock is what it's called, that will vest over a period of time. 3 years is common for a founder. And it will likely be issued to you at the par value of the stock in your charter. So it's probably going to be like a penny a share. That's kind of like the average. So founder shares at a penny a share literally cost nothing. I'm calling a penny nothing. I think that's safe, right? We can give it a penny. So for tax purposes, you really won't incur any income for having gotten that. But by the time you might sell or exit years later, that is also your basis, which at a penny per share is pretty low. So you're probably going to have a pretty big spread of a gain by the time you would liquidate or exit, presumably years later. But so that kind of wraps up our allotted time. Again, this part's really interesting because you could sit and play with just those two numbers all day long. And I don't mean to oversimplify or gloss over the way that investors will look at valuation. I mean, they're very valuation sensitive. So what do they want? They want that initial value to be that you're worth $1. You want that number. You want $1 billion. So somewhere in between $1 and $1 billion is the answer. Investors won't be quite that vulture-like, but some are. So be careful of the investors you pick. This class isn't about necessarily the cap table, and it's certainly not about investors, but I will tell you from 39 years of experience, it's very important who you bring in as your early investors, because you will most likely be living with them through the good and the bad times, and there will be bad times for the duration of your company unless they're superseded on the board by some future investor. So I'm happy to answer questions until people want to leave. I do have about 5 minutes left. I've got to go do something, but happy to answer any questions. Again, you can find these 3 files on the Swartz Center Then Connects website under archived files, I think. And one last question, yeah.
I guess a lot of the financial modeling can be pretty complex. So would you recommend bringing in kind of outside help as a startup founder if you're not like an accountant or finance professional?
To some degree. I mean, you don't want to go in, you want to be practiced and composed when you talk to investors. And it used to be, when I say go in, you used to actually go meet investors. The world is different now. You'll most likely do it through Zoom. In fact, you might get investors you never meet until you happen to meet them 2 years into the business. That never used to happen. That's bizarre thinking. But I've raised money from several investors that I never ever shook their hand, never ever met them. In the old days, I would of course gone in their office and sweated it out and met them in person. But I think it can be good to have you help someone kind of kick off the model process for you. And if you're like, well, gosh, you kind of own that, why don't I just have you on as a consultant, and when I need it updated, I'll use you. Or you may say, well, this isn't that hard, and I'm going to be changing all the time. I don't want to call them up every third day. I'll just get them to get it ready, and then I'll maintain it from there. So, whatever your comfort level is. If you're too busy to deal with it, and it's always going to be a big stress point, it's like, oh my God, I know it's not that hard, but I can't sit down in front of that model. It's just not my strength. Then probably makes sense to get a fraction of someone to help you out. Yes.
Any good resources you would suggest that we can follow on?
That you can, what's that last part? I'll tell you, the Khan Academy has some really good stuff out there. I mean, that's, and if you, so KHAN, I think maybe you've heard of that. So there's a lot of free tutorials out there on modeling, financial modeling, projections. What I will tell you is it's good to have a resource that has kind of been through the muck, the good and the bad, and what might look reasonable, what might not look reasonable. Because while it's theoretical, it also needs to be viewed as practical. And like I say, going from that 1 to 10 to $100 million in revenue, that's probably not a practical depiction I'd want out there. I'd want something that's more grounded. And again, if you've memorialized the assumptions and the notes that you've made along the way, you know, people will understand what you've done, and they may say, well, you know, for the most part, this looks good, but I think these two things are things I would really kind of consider modifying. Then it's not like the end of the world if you have to change something. And they're not going to say, oh my gosh, you failed the test, you know, get out of my office or off the Zoom. You didn't do good. You're not going to have that kind of reaction, I don't think. But, you know, financial modeling is iterative. You're going to have to touch it multiple times. That's just kind of the nature of the beast, especially if you're raising money. But even if you're not raising money, you want to see where you're headed. So, yes.
So like, but what I'm thinking about for the company that I'm trying to found is that, as you said, there are like two divisions, the product and service type of company.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to come up with like a financial model that's like self-funding, where you're offering some services. And then through service, you get revenue and data that you need to build the product. So,
Okay.
So that's what I'm thinking. So how often do you see people doing that? That they have like the service division firing up the product, and they try to do that from the beginning of the company.
Yeah, you know, you'll often hear investors and mentors advise you it's important to focus. If you can do that and not become too, you know, defocused in both the services you're providing and then the product you're trying to build with those proceeds, that's fine. And of course, I don't know your situation and everything. If you're a couple people, that's pretty limited. If you're 7 or 8 people, that's, you know, 4 times the resources. So you'll have to decide how much, you know, mind share and time you have to give to possibly competing interests.
Like what I see, like when I carefully observe how Amazon runs, is that they try to create divisions where one division becomes a customer of the other. Then automatically there's that pressure internally that starts making the product division very efficient, because there's another business division that's a direct customer. So having this internal customer producer setup kind of makes everybody efficient, and they're trying to grow it. But of course, that puts undue pressure on the employees, but it's good for the founders.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's as long as you can manage that operationally inside, you know, you'll know if you can pull it off or not. So
One online question. Will investors want to know their ROI and how soon they will get their money back?
yeah, so investors have different time horizons in which they want to be able to exit the investment. And venture capital funds typically have a 5-year, a 10-year horizon, but individual investments, they'd prefer to probably exit that position earlier than that, maybe 5 to 7 years. So you will probably receive reporting requests from investors like at least once a year, maybe every 6 months, that ask for your financials. And then if you guys have gone through any kind of transaction that ascribed a value to the business that they can latch on to. There's a certain kind of valuation called a 409A valuation where you have the value of your common stock performed by an outside firm. If you're going to issue stock options, you are supposed to issue them at an independently derived value per common share. And that valuation, investors would be interested in it because it's a valuation that an outside party ascribed to your company. You didn't do, you gave them information, but they performed. And that would be a third-party objective evidence information that you could give to investors. But, you know, I would say investors would be interested in probably a 5 to 7 year time frame, which they can exit. And, you know, they want to make 10 times their money. So they're not in this for just, you know, 2 or 3 times their money. Otherwise, they'd invest in something a lot less risky. Startups are risky. Early stage companies are risky. Technologies companies are risky. So they want the commensurate return for that risk. Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up, and I appreciate everyone here and online. Thank you. Okay, take care.